Guillermo del Toro has been making movies since he was 21 years old. He has made a ton of great movies, but he never had the opportunity to adapt his favorite story. Until now. Frankenstein has been Guillermo del Toro's favorite story since he was a child. He always wanted to make it into a film. But why? Well, in this video we'll talk about why Guillermo del Toro waited 25 years to make this film, what changes are there from the original story, why he made those changes, and finally how he made his dream movie. And I guarantee you that when you finish this video, you won't see Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein the same way again. First, we need to talk about the original Frankenstein story. This will help you understand why Guillermo del Toro's version is so special and give you a better understanding of the film. The original Frankenstein novel was written by Mary Shelley and published in 1818. It is considered the first great work of Gothic science fiction and over the years has become an horror classic. But what is this story about? Well, this novel tells the tragic story of Victor Frankenstein, a talented young scientist who, due to his ambition, ends up playing God. He therefore decides to defeat death and gathers various parts of corpses in order to create the perfect human being. But when he manages to bring this creature to life through a scientific experiment, he realizes that this is not the perfect man he had imagined. So Victor is horrified by his creation and, out of fear and revulsion, decides to abandon it. So this creature is left alone, and as it moves forward, it sees the worst of the world and also the most beautiful. Therefore, this is not just a horror story. It is really a philosophical reflection on how far science can go, the responsibility of a creator for his creation, and what it means to be human. All those things have made Frankenstein an instant classic that has endured for many years, from 1818 to the present day. This means that this book has inspired many people around the world, one of them being the Mexican treasure Guillermo del Toro. So what is Guillermo del Toro's connection to this story? And why is it a story he has wanted to tell for 25 years? Well, let's talk about Guillermo del Toro's personal connection to the story so you can understand why it is so personal to him. Guillermo del Toro has been fascinated with Frankenstein since he was 11 years old. In several interviews, he has mentioned that Mary Shelley's novel was practically his Bible. He sees Frankenstein as much more than just a horror story. He's fascinated by the way the story touches on quite complex themes such as death, life, and the human condition, and all of this has shaped his obsessions with these topics. Furthermore, in several of his films, we have seen his passion for these marginalized creatures from The Shape of Water or even Pinocchio. This personal passion and fascination he has for these creatures could be said to originate from Frankenstein. Therefore, he always knew that one day he would be able to make his own version of this story, and I find this truly fascinating because it really sums up that this is not just a Frankenstein story, but the creation of a director who has always been obsessed with these themes that have marked him and which he truly identifies with. This makes the story more unique, special, and above all, personal. But how did he actually do it? Because Guillermo del Toro didn't follow the original Frankenstein story to the letter. Instead, he included his own twist and his own essence. So what did Guillermo del Toro change from the original story? Did this improve or worsen the film? And why did he decide to make changes if it was his favorite story? Let's see how Guillermo del Toro adapted his own Frankenstein story to film, so that you understand that there is really much more intention than it seems. Guillermo del Toro remained fairly faithful to the original novel, but that doesn't mean he didn't include his own changes. These were changes to the plot, characters, and tone of certain moments that give the story his own personal touch. He describes it as a more emotional and symbolic rethinking than a literal reworking of the original work, a more human thematic approach. One of the changes he decided to make was to give the story a more human touch. Shelley's novel focuses a little bit more on the dangers of scientific ambition, but the film is slightly different. Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein focuses more on emotional aspects. In Guillermo del Toro's worlds, it is not just a story with a moral, it's about forgiveness, understanding, and the importance of listening to each other. This is summed up in one of my favorite lines from the film, in which the creature says, "The miracle is not that I speak, but that you will listen." I feel that this perfectly expresses what Guillermo del Toro wanted to convey with this story. It explains why Guillermo del Toro relates Frankenstein more to a drama-filled story than a simple horror story. Another change that Guillermo del Toro made was that in the original novel, Victor Frankenstein grows up with love impairments, which is not the case in this new version. In the film, Victor grows up with an abusive father. But what is the reason behind this change? Well, it serves to make the character of Victor Frankenstein more complex. It gives him a motivation that comes from from a feeling of failure, as his father told him he had to be the best version of himself, punishing him and pressuring him in ways that were not appropriate. This adds a layer of complexity to the original story and explores the family trauma that Guillermo del Toro likes to explore. But there is also another change that many say is the most emotionally significant. This change concerns the relationship between Victor and the creature. In the novel, Victor rejects the creature from the very beginning. In contrast, in this new story, Victor initially sees him as an achievement, as something wonderful and his best creation. Therefore, Guillermo del Toro explores the themes of abandonment and the search of acceptance in the film. In this way, he focuses more on a story about a father-son relationship, about how a creature seeks his father's love and what he receives in return is rejection and abuse, a pattern that has been repeated since Victor was a child. That is why, even though the creature is the one covered in scars and with a rather unusual body, the film focuses on telling the story that the real monster in the story is Victor Frankenstein. And that is precisely what Guillermo del Toro wants to convey with his version. As he himself says, the beauty of the film is that you start with violence and in the end you understand forgiveness comes. Forgiveness frees both the giver and the receiver. While the novel touches on a more cruel theme, Guillermo del Toro wanted it to give a focus in which hope will always prevail. But this was not the only change. Guillermo del Toro also moved the film forward in time and set it in the 1950s, in the midst of the Crimean War. And here's why. By moving the film setting forward in time, Victor Frankenstein is able to use the corpses of fallen soldiers to build the creature, which gives it a very interesting symbolism. It shows how the perfect man is actually created from many tragedies and the cruelty of war. In addition, thanks to this, the film can also introduce themes about the ridiculousness of war and capitalism, thus giving the story an extra layer. But this doesn't come out of nowhere. Guillermo del Toro loves the story of Frankenstein, so he obviously drew inspiration from many versions of the story, from the original novel to various adaptations throughout history. But there is also inspiration from Christopher Lee's 1957 version, specifically in the creature's case. On the other hand, you can also see inspiration from Bernie Wrightston's version in the 1970s, especially in the creature's clothing and hair. I think that when you see these images, you can really notice the inspiration for Guillermo del Toro's film version. In addition, Guillermo del Toro also included essential parts of the novel that other versions ignored. For example, in this story, Frankenstein learns to speak and read in the blindsmith hut, something that other versions had ignored before. Therefore, by using all these references from different versions, Guillermo del Toro version is truly a tribute to the character of Frankenstein, using essential parts throughout his story to tell a completely new one that maintains the heart of the original story. In this way, Guillermo del Toro manages to create a version of Frankenstein that maintains and respects the novel, but at the same time is not afraid to inject his own vision. But none of this would be possible if Guillermo del Toro weren't obsessed with the way he tells stories, because it is not just about telling the story, it's about showing it. And all this through the incredible world he created for Frankenstein. Guillermo del Toro filled the film with settings and small details that you probably didn't notice, which make all the difference. So what are these details and how Guillermo del Toro built the perfect world of Frankenstein? Let's see how Guillermo del Toro built the perfect world of Frankenstein so that you can understand how the world complements the story and how this helps to tell the story better. Guillermo del Toro decided to use practical sets, as in most of his films, instead of green screens and CGI. This gives the film a gigantic scale, but Frankenstein was also filmed in real locations. For example, one of them was the Frankenstein Mansion, which was filmed at Wilton House in England. But if there is one that is truly impressive and that Guillermo del Toro calls the essential piece for this lab, he really wanted to show the large scale of the story. So many of the things you see here are giant and large in scale. This lab is full of details and it is so complex that it took the production team 9 months to build it. It really shows that this is a passion project for Guillermo del Toro. But what is also impressive is the makeup design. For example, for the body parts that were used to create Frankenstein, they try to make it as realistic as possible, studying the structure of ligaments, tendons, and various characteristics of the human body in detail. Another great example of the great makeup work is the design of the creature played by Jacob Elordi. Guillermo del Toro decided that his creature would not have the typical scars or visible stitches on the skin that can be seen in other versions. But why? Well, in Guillermo del Toro's words, he said that he didn't want it to look like the victim of an accident. He wanted it to be seen with the purity of a newborn soul. That's why this monster body looks quite pure. It includes very defined lines that look aesthetically pleasing, and they also made the skin translucent so that it looks as if there are veins and tendons underneath. For this, they drew heavily on Renaissance marble statues for inspiration. This gave the creature a newborn look, but with a strange yet beautiful appearance at the same time. But the film also uses vivid, yet dramatic colors. The film is full of green, blue, and dark settings. In this way, it displays a romantic gothic aesthetic rather than a simple pure horror. So throughout different settings, from the monster's makeup to the construction of sets, Guillermo del Toro built a perfect Frankenstein world, one that is sure to endure throughout the years. Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein ends up being a beautiful film, a passion project that Guillermo del Toro had wanted to make for years, and thanks to his love for the story, he was able to give us an incredible version. It is an incredibly beautiful story, full of profound messages about humanity, relationships, and the way the world can be sometimes. It is also a great tribute to the character of Frankenstein from the different inspirations throughout time, and most importantly, it is a deeply human film. Thanks for watching this video to the end, and if you want to see more film content like this, don't forget to subscribe.